Welcome to the Leadership Launchpad Project. I'm Rob Kalwarowsky. I'm flying solo today, sort of. Of course, Susan Hobson's down at her Princeton reunion, so you just have to enjoy my sultry FM voice. And before we get to our guests, of course, we have to start off with a quote. And it's something that, of course, it's always part of our journeys and choosing, and we talk a lot about self-leadership on this show. And so I wanted to start there with a quote from Carl Jung. And he says, "I am not what happened to me. I am what I choose to become." Now, of course, with that, we have to introduce our special guest, the author of The Coaching Habit, a book that's sold over 1 million copies. Another book that he's written just recently, How to Work with Almost Anyone. And we're going to definitely talk about asshole bosses with that. The founder of MBS Works and Box of Crayons, Michael Bungay Stanier, is with us. Mike, how are you doing?
I'm great, Rob. Thanks for having me along. I love that quote from Jung. I know it. One of my other favorite ones from him is, or two actually, "I'd rather be whole than be good, and the gold is in the dark," because it's like, we're not what happened to us; it's who we're becoming, and there's work to be done to integrate and to go into the mess and kind of figure some stuff out as part of that process to becoming the best version of who you are.
It's something, we love to do. And before we dig deeper on you, Michael, can you tell us a little bit about you?
Well, there's always the polished public story and then the real story around that. So, I finished high school being banned from my reunion for something known as the balloon incident. I finished law school being sued by one of my law professors for defamation. I won a Rhodes Scholarship where my only real achievement was falling in love with a Canadian. We just celebrated our 29th wedding anniversary, so that's been a success.
Congratulations.
Mid-20s, I'm trying to figure out what to do with my life because I've spent too long at university and I still have no clear idea. And I stumbled through the world of innovation and creativity, where I spent time running focus groups and talking to people and trying to invent products and services that they wanted. So I helped invent, in a very small way, stuffed crust pizza for Pizza Hut, and also a whiskey that has been gone down as the worst single malt whiskey ever invented. Then moved to the world of change management, in part to try and figure out why none of my inventions ever seemed to take off. And then eventually ended up in Toronto. I had a job lined up, but we flew up, or we had our flights up on 9/11, so my job disappeared. So out of necessity, I started my own business, and that kind of launched me as a writer. So I've now published 8 or 9 books, The Coaching Habit being the bestseller, that 1 point something million copies sold. And the Box of Crayons, the company you referenced, is a training company. We teach busy managers how to be more coach-like and add curiosity to their culture. And MBS.works, where we help individuals, amongst other things, find their next big thing and what their next big adventure might be.
I love it. And Michael, I just want to harken back to the quote. Like, obviously you've had a fair amount of hard moments. And so what are you choosing to become now?
Well, I don't totally know what I'm choosing to become. I think actually the work is in doing the work. It's like process over outcome. One of my favorite poems is from the German poet Rilke. The English translation is called The Man Watching. And the line that particularly resonates for me, he's talking about wrestling with the angel, like a reference to the biblical Jacob and the angel. And his point in the poem is, look, when you wrestle with an angel, you always lose. Nobody beats the angel. But it's a important, special moment where you get to wrestle with an angel, because the angel doesn't wrestle with everybody. They only wrestle with people who are up to big things. And the line in the poem that I love is, his goal is not to win, his goal is to be deeply defeated by ever greater things. And I do think we unlock our greatness when we're working on the hard things, the big things. And so I'm not totally sure what I'm becoming. I'm just trying to find the best, biggest thing for to be deeply defeated by, because I know whatever I am becoming, that's going to accelerate that process.
I love it. And so what's that best, biggest thing that you're doing now to wrestle with the angel?
Well, I've got two projects that feel vaguely impossible right now. Maybe three. One is looking at actual book sales and going, how do I accelerate those? My team and I have a small team, have a goal to sell 10 million copies of my books in the next 10 years.
Mm-hmm.
That's really hard because honestly, it's quite a success if you get to sell 5,000 copies of a book. I mean, books are hard to write, but they're really hard to sell. But I'm just back from a conference called ATD, the Training and Development Training big conference down in New Orleans. And I probably had 100 people come up to me over 3 days saying how important the coaching habit was for them and how significant it had been. And it was amazing. It stroked my male ego delightfully. And it was a real reminder that if I could get that book into more hands, more lives will change. So that's one big project, which is around 10 million books over the next 10 years.
Mm-hmm.
Not really much of a clue how to do that, but it feels like I'm going to have to become somebody else to try and do that. And then the second one is a nascent project that's something about how change happens in organizations.
Mm.
The coaching habit was a success because it simplifies a complex thing. It makes coaching less weird for regular people. My belief is that the world of change is very fragmented and noisy and confusing. I think I could perhaps come in with a way of making that feel cleaner and clearer and more accessible for people in that world. And then the third thing is not having my whole life get consumed by work projects. So how do I build a really good life or continue to build a good life for myself here in Toronto? They're all three difficult projects.
It's they're totally, and it's something I want to dig into change with you, but it's something that's really tough, right? Is like we do a lot of future visualization work, and it's something that helps, and I can totally send you some things, and happy to have a session if you want, but it helps with the defining a little bit, but not necessarily like the plan. But yeah, it's definitely a process in doing that. It's not just like a one-time thing. You're like, oh yeah.
What do you notice happens when you kind of do that scenario planning and you move people into a future state? What gets unlocked for them?
Yeah. So this is something, like I can talk about personally my experience.
Yeah.
So when I hired Susan, who isn't here this week, to be my coach, would have been, I think, 2019. And we started doing like future visualization, and all I could, because I was like really in mental illness, and all I could get to was like, I saw myself on a stage, and that was it.
Right.
And as I, did therapy and got medication and things started to kind of calm in that area, it was like, one was, it was like, oh, I got to do speaking. So I got on, like hired a coach, did TED. And then even just a few months ago at a retreat out here, I started seeing like, oh, this is the community I want to build.
Right.
And the impact I want to have with that community. And so that gave me clarity on, and I'm writing a book now because part of that, but it's like, now it's sort of like, I see it, and now it's mapping, just basically aligning my subconscious to going and doing these things.
Yeah, nice. I do have a kind of bigger mission statement for the work I do, or the impact I want to have. And the impact is to infect 1 billion people with the possibility virus. So, a billion is a unreasonably large number. Um, the possibility virus is really about helping people see that they have choice and to make the braver choice. And the possibility virus, which is a metaphor that worked better before COVID, um, is about me getting out of the way so I can create content that spreads without me having to be the guru or the centerpiece of it all. So typically what happens to me is I finish a project, like a book or whatever, a course, and I'll then go, of all the things I could do, what's likely to get me closest to infecting a billion people with the possibility virus? So I'm trying to keep making choices for the bigger game that I'm trying to play, and then almost the final piece of the process is me becoming the person who needs to do that to have that impact.
I love that. And Michael, it's so interesting, right? And I love this possibility and choice. And I think it's something that I used to struggle with, right? And it's a lot of folks struggle with, is this element of, and I hear this a lot from folks that I'm coaching. It's like, oh, I still thought I was like a child and I couldn't choose. And I was waiting for some higher power to tell me. And like I experienced this too. And it's like, for me, the work that, like, I do a lot of work around toxic leadership and bad bosses and that type of stuff. And it's like, all I want people to get out of it is like, hey, you can choose. Like, it's complex.
Yeah.
Like, it's not easy, but you can choose.
Exactly. I don't do that much one-to-one coaching, but often when I do, the first conversation, somebody going, God, I just want to be able to do this, this, and this. And I go, well, you should do that then. And they're like, you're an amazing coach. And I'm like, am I? Or am I just pointing to the fact that I'm giving you permission to make a choice?
How do you think we unlock self-autonomy or self-leadership and people making those choices at a global scale?
I don't know how to do it at a global scale. I struggle hard enough to do it on a one-to-one. I find it hard enough to do it for me. So how to do it at a global scale, I'm not totally sure. But, what you're doing is creating, inviting agency. And, of course, the paradox is, you trying to make somebody else have more agency is a way of removing agency from them. As you try and rescue them or fix them or do it for them. It's like, I'm going to empower you is a contradiction in terms, because, it's agency and empowerment have to be a kind of, that person has to pick up the banner. That person has to take the step forward. So there's something about this where you recognize your lack of direct power, and therefore you have influence, but you don't have control over this. So that's helpful, just to know your limits. There's an education level which is just to, it goes right back to Viktor Frankl and Man's Search for Meaning, which is like you're always at choice. To understand that every choice you make has prizes and punishments. And giving people some capacity to kind of weigh up. All right, if I did this, here are the wins and here's the pros and cons, the prizes and punishments. If I didn't do this, which is also a choice, prizes and punishments. But I think one of the profound models of change is the immunity to change work from Bob Keegan and Lisa Leahy, where they, these are my words rather than their words, but effectively they go, the status quo has a much stronger pull on you than you realize. It keeps you locked down much more strongly. And like Gulliver in Gulliver's Travels, a lot of the strings that keep you tied to the ground are your unconscious commitments. Commitments to keeping other people happy, to keeping the situation as it is, to keeping yourself protected, to maintaining a short-term ego state, for want of a better phrase. And And actually, one of the unlocks for agency is starting to see more clearly your hitherto unconscious commitments,
Yep.
and then going, are they still serving me?
Totally. It's funny, right? Is choice is part of the healing trauma process.
Mm.
And for me, that as I was healing that, that's when I started making more decisions.
Yeah,
But it's exactly what you're mentioning, right? Is like so much goes on in our subconscious that basically disempowers us. And but I really love your framework in the coaching habit where it's we need to be curious. And this is where
yeah,
we go a lot in our coaching is both curious in terms of the emotions, like when I feel, these negative feelings or the self-talk that's not supportive, digging in with curiosity and trying to figure out what does this mean and where is it coming from? Because it's likely one of these things that
yeah,
you can work with.
yeah. When you reflect on your own journey, and I don't know it in any detail, just kind of what you've been kind of implying or talking about in this conversation. What were the one or two things that were most significant in granting you a greater sense of agency and courage?
Yeah. So, I mean, just quick summary, my journey. So, I graduated college, mechanical engineering degree, went into mining, worked in a toxic environment with a toxic boss, got depressed. This is the part, the self-agency part, tried to commit suicide on a Sunday night, woke up on a Monday and went to work.
Right.
Even though I knew consciously, I was like, my job's killing me, all these things, but I couldn't quit.
Yeah.
Then basically had some really poor therapy and some other stuff that decided, no one can help me. Kind of drifted for another 6 years, and then like went into therapy, went into coaching, trying to like figure out what I could do next, and then started. Obviously, therapy was very helpful, and medication was
Yeah.
very helpful, and all these things. And that was like what led to today. The
Yeah.
first, yeah, the first big moment was actually, weirdly enough, it wasn't a choice. It was like in therapy we were doing, and I would always get blocked. And one of the things in EMDR is like when you get blocked, it's like you try to, you have like you can think of an object that makes you feel safe or that opens you up. And I kept saying dog. And one time my therapist turned to me and she goes, Rob, did you ever have a dog as a kid? I was like, no. She's like, you could be a good idea to get one. Like they're super, helpful
Yeah.
and like they help you a lot with recovery and all these things. And I went home and like it was kind of weird because at the time my wife and I were like I was literally watching videos of dogs all the time, and my wife was like showing me pictures. But I always thought I was like I can't get one because I've never had one, kind of thing. Anyways, went home and I told my wife, I was like, my therapist thinks we can get a dog, and literally like 2 weeks later, my wife just jumped into action. We bought a dog. But that was like one of these moments where, and like he's been amazing, super healing. But that was one of the moments where I was like, oh, I can choose things that are different in my life.
Right.
And then that led to like now I live in Costa Rica, and like,
Yeah.
I got married and all these things that I just was not possible for me before.
There's something very powerful about that, realizing how many things you actually do have permission to do, that you've made
Yeah.
up stories around that this is not available to you. And I think one of the things that can be helpful is understanding what's at risk. And it's very easy to, I think the jargon word is catastrophize, kind of go from this and then 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 nuclear war and apocalypse. So I probably won't do that. And in fact, the immunity to change process, Keegan and Leahy's work, has one part of that, one step of it is for you to imagine the worst, so you can see how much you're making up around that, and getting more and more experienced and therefore nuanced at understanding what really is at risk. And often it boils down to money can be a risk, time can be at risk, and reputation can be at risk. And so with money, you've got to be smart. You've got to go, well, if I did lose this, would it bankrupt me, or, what would happen? Time is often where people end up with time is just to go, I'm willing to take a risk on the time because all I lose is my time. And that's something that's more easy to give away for some people. And then reputation, there's something very powerful to realize how few people actually think about you. Or how few people have, with how few people you have a reputation. Certainly in that more broad sense. Of course, you tend to have a reputation in your inner circles, your family and your closer friends. And it's often protecting that reputation is something that keeps us a little stuck as well.
Absolutely. Yeah. There's a lot of folks with belonging as a thing. And then with money and time, often money and time, there's some deeper meaning that folks have about it, which is holding them in that status quo.
Yeah. Agreed.
Now, about the culture change, right, is like, I'd love to talk more about that because, of course, status quo in an organization's just as powerful. It's a bunch of people who like status quo. How do you think of culture change in an organization?
Well, I'm still getting to grips with it. I've been in that field one way or another for 30 years. And so I've seen firsthand the number of attempts to do culture change that fail. And the statistics bear that out. It's like north of 70%, possibly as high as 90% of stuff just doesn't work particularly well. So it's hard because it's not like there's been stupid people doing that work. There's been smart people trying to work. But organizations are homeostatic. Organizations are built to resist change. The system, it's not even one person, it's like the system. You push into a system and it pushes back. That's just true of systems in general.
Yeah.
So just recognizing that it's a complex, messy, difficult thing that nobody quite knows how to do, it's already a sense of relief because you're like, okay, it's not like I'm stupid. It's like, this is hard. But fundamentally, you're trying to work to do two things. And they're a little bit like traditional physics and quantum theory. They both both those theories work well at different scales, but they don't quite work well together. Quantum theory works really well with small things. Traditional physics works well with apples and trees and gravity, but they don't connect. And the same is true with, to shift the culture, you have to change structurally some of the organization. Winston Churchill said, we shape our buildings and then they shape us. And, our work is shaped by the structures, visible and invisible, that are part of our organizational culture. Everything from the org chart to the building layout to the dress sense, all of that. And then you're also working with individual behavior and individual behavior change, because you can describe culture as, here's what we do every day. This is what's norm. These are our norms, and those norms are often habitualized and therefore unspoken. And so, even though you might have your values up on the wall, or even some statement about culture up on the wall, it's really the unconscious behavioral acts every day that are the greatest clue as to what your culture is. So you're trying to shift both of those things, and people tend to focus more on one than the other. Some people are like, okay, so we just need training, really good training, and and information. We need to tell people what's going on. Some people go, no, we need to do a reorg and redesign the organization and lay some people off and shifting things around. And the truth is, you need some combination of the two to make culture change work.
I love it. Michael, like we have some clients we're working with now that have like acquired a company or hired a bunch of people on. Like, how do you think of that kind of merger or like super growth where just you have this influx of folks?
Yeah. Well, it's a big question, and the best answer is, well, it depends. Depends on a thousand things. But if we're working on the assumption that we've got a culture that we kind of like, and we've got a big influx of things coming through now, what do we, an influx of people which kind of dilute the current culture, then you're like, so what's essential for us to keep? So the first thing just to recognize is you're not going to be preserving the current culture, you're going to be evolving the current culture. It's going to change. That's part of why you've got all these new people coming in. It's not about culture fit, it's about culture add. Mm-hmm. So how will this evolve? Now, the worst of what happens is everything just gets diluted and messy. And so now you've got competing cultures and competing behaviors, and you've lost some of the magic. What's most powerful is understanding what's essential. So, with a complex organization, I mean, there are three kind of types of models. There's a simple, complicated, and complex model. Simple is like baking a cake. It's like add an egg and a cup of water to this cake mix, stir it for a bit, bake it in this oven at this time, and you're going to get a cake. And even people like me can mostly bake a cake. It's like very simple. Complicated is more like trying to launch a space shuttle. It is a lot of moving pieces. And a lot of it is this checklist and then this checklist and then this checklist. So it's like a really big cake. It's a complicated cake. Complex is an emergent system. So the classic example of that is a flock of birds. Those murmurations of starlings? You see those big kind of clouds of birds that kind of make shapes in the sky and they look amazing. But none of those birds have a spreadsheet. None of those birds have a checklist. The murmuration of swallows or sparrows is an emergent property based off a few very simple principles. As I remember, the principles are fly as close as you can to the other birds, fly towards the center, don't run into another bird. And those principles are at tension with each other. They're actually kind of like, I'm trying to fly close, but trying to fly into the center, but not bump into things. You've actually got the birds chirping away behind you.
That's
so
right.
You're living the bird
flock of parakeets just went by.
Yeah, exactly. So I organized that. You're welcome. I suspect with as you're scaling rapidly, part of what you've got to ask is, what is essential and non-negotiable about this culture? And you may choose from three different levels. Now I'm going to reference Ed Shine's work on culture. And he says, look, a strong culture is aligned across three different things. It's the artifacts, the stuff that you see. It's the espoused values, the stuff that you hear. And then there are our behaviors, our often unconscious behaviors, the stuff that we do. And if what you see and what you hear and what you do is all aligned, you have a strong culture. Mm-hmm. And so you may be going, I say, so what do we need to, what's the artifact that makes this culture really clear to people? And what's the espoused value, the thing that we keep saying time and time and time and time again? when you're working with leaders, basically you say your job is to keep repeating the same message relentlessly and endlessly until you are bored to tears with it. Because it's only when you are utterly sick and tired of it and bored that it might be starting to get through. And then there's and what are the kind of behaviors that are necessary, and what are the behaviors that are unacceptable? And if you have those three things figured out, and that's not a small project, because you're trying to have fewer things rather than more things. You're trying to have as few things as possible, but that have the most impact. Then you've got potentially the levers for trying to continue to evolve your culture in a way that works.
I love the example, and of course, nature chimed in. So,
Yeah, it's perfect.
Michael, of course, I think we're seeing some transition, at least in leadership, where folks are pivoting towards now this kind of human-centric, purpose-driven leadership. What would you say some of the top leadership skills going forward are going to be, or are?
Well, I suspect they're not that dissimilar from the ones that have been in the past. Part of a leadership skill is having the courage to make a decision and to make a brave choice. And, a lot of organizations are full of people dithering. And I know this because, my organization, I'm often the one who's dithering. I am that person. But it's strategy is, I guess, let me do a reset. An organization has a DNA, and there are twin strands to a DNA, and the twin strands are strategy and culture. And in the end, strategy is, what are we saying yes to and what are we saying no to? And the braver those choices are, often the better that strategy is. Most strategies probably have a bit too much in them rather than too little. And, you can have a few single simple decisions at a strategic level, and then how you get all that stuff done is complicated and messy and confusing and make mistakes, you don't make mistakes. But strategy is around being brave enough to say, we're saying yes to this, and we're going to say no to a whole bunch of stuff that we could do, but we're not going to do, because that will dissolve our focus. And then culture is, in the end, do you have the very best people doing their best stuff to deliver the strategy? So how do you bring out the very best of them? And if there's been an evolution in organizations, because I see probably similar stuff that you see, it's more thinking about who are our best people and are they doing their best work to deliver the strategy. And so I think the new book is called How to Work with Almost Anyone, and the key idea of the new book is, how do you build the best possible relationship with the people with whom you work? Mm-hmm. Not the best relationship, because not every relationship is going to be bright and shiny, but the best possible one. How do you build the best potential? And then I think, and this is the kind of key answer, the best possible relationships have three elements to them. They need to be safe, they need to be vital, and they need to be repairable. And so, to answer your question, I think what leaders need to start seeing is they need to build relationships with people that are safe, table stakes, vital, meaning there's also risk and challenge and provocation and ambiguity and kind of dealing with the mess. Too many organizations, I think, overemphasize safe and don't realize that you also need a bit of edge there as well. Otherwise, it's a bit too cloying. And then thirdly, repairability, which means how will we fix it when things go wrong? Because if you're able to repair, you're able to keep people, to strengthening the bonds and keeping people longer doing the work that they should.
I have to ask now, Michael, you mentioned that you're dithering. Why do you think that's the case? And how do we solve it?
I don't know. I solve it by having some systems set up around me, which is the consequences of my dithering don't freeze the people who work with me and for me.
Yeah.
So, we know that if Michael has started bottlenecking, people on my team go, Michael, I need a decision by end of day Friday. If I don't get a decision by end of day Friday, I will make the decision and we'll move ahead. And so there's just I mean, I know this to be true about myself, is that, on my good days, I'm pretty decisive, and on my bad days, I get a little bit kind of becalmed.
Mm-hmm.
So I built systems and empowered the people around me to not let that contaminate the way that we work
I love
too
it.
much.
It's
They still do. It still does contaminate the way we work, but it reduces the contamination.
totally. I wanted to share that with folks because it is a self-awareness thing, right? And it's
Yeah.
like so many of us, I mean, we're not self-aware. And so sometimes it is putting that system in place where it does check the boxes.
Yeah.
And then also, obviously, we work on ourselves to improve, but we also have
Yeah.
the other checks and balances in the same
Well,
way.
the new book, How to Work with Almost Anyone, is pretty much a self-help growth development book wrapped in a business book, because the key tactic in that book is have a conversation about how you work together before you start working together. That's going to be really helpful. But for those conversations to be maximally useful, you need a degree of self-awareness.
Totally.
And so the book offers 3 exercises per question, so 15 exercises in all, to just give you better language and better clarity about who you are and how you actually work, so that you're better armed to sit down with somebody and go, let me tell you what it's like to work with me. Let me tell you the good and the bad and the ugly. And let me tell you how to manage that so that you get the best out of me and I get the best out of you, and we avoid the traps in our ways of working, and we basically give ourselves the very best chance of working optimally with each other.
I love it. Michael, I mean, I already asked you a little bit about, some of the big projects that you're working on, but we always have to ask this question on the show is, what do you want your legacy to be?
I don't really care, if I'm honest about it. I just don't feel that's something I can control very much. So I've got a purpose. I'm trying to make the bravest choices I can to help me infect 1 billion people with the possibility virus. Some stuff works, some stuff doesn't work. I get thrilled when I hear people talking to me about how the coaching habit, for instance, has been such a big influence on what they do and projects they run and all sorts of stuff. That's great. But, the odds are that 100 years after I'm dead, nobody has heard of me, all my books are out of print, I'm utterly, totally forgotten. And I'm fine with that. Like, I don't really need to be remembered or have a legacy. I'm just trying to do the best work I can to make as big a difference and improvement in the world as I can right now.
Amazing. For folks out there, if you want to connect with Michael, I've dropped his LinkedIn in the podcast notes. You can go to mbs.works, boxofcrayons.com. And then, of course, you can buy any of his books anywhere. The Coaching Habit, How to Work with Almost Anyone, and a bunch more. And whenever, Michael, you put out your book on culture, we'd love to have you back on to talk about
Oh,
it.
thank you. Yeah, probably 2027. Next year, I'm putting out a journal, so a way of people to reflect and kind of stay on track for doing the work. 2026 is the 10th anniversary of the Coaching Habit, so we're going to put out a new hardback edition and we're going to redo the audiobook. So that means
Amazing.
2027 for the Change book, I think.
Well, we can get you on before then.
All right, that sounds great. Rob, thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you for joining us. Obviously, for folks out there, hit subscribe to Leadership Launchpad Project on your favorite podcast platform and share this episode with any leaders in your life. We talked a lot about some pretty incredible stuff on this one, so definitely share it. And for one-on-one coaching, leadership development, head on over to elitehighperformance.com. For me, where I want to leave folks with today is where we landed. It's the self-awareness. It always starts there. And as you become self-aware, it also opens up this self-authorization, which we talked about at the beginning, where we're starting to realize, oh, there's actually a choice I can make versus I just usually just do this and I don't even think about it. And that's the magic. Michael, thank you so much for joining us this week.
Thanks, Rob. It was a pleasure.
Everyone listening, thank you so much for listening, and we'll see you all next week.